Hello and welcome back to Paper Lives, the podcast where we peel back the decaying pages of long forgotten newspapers and journals to find fragile stories and bring them to life once again. Today we will travel to the scenic Middlesex town of Staines, known mostly today for its unfortunate name and wannabe gangster resident Ali G. Long before that maligned character forced the council to add upon Thames to Staines, it was that river, the Thames, and the vital bridge that crossed it that defined the town. On one heady Saturday in the March of 1871, years of campaigning to remove the toll from the bridge came to fruition, and the jubilation and frenzy that came from such a simple act tells us much about the development of local identity, civic pride, and the importance of the right to roam at this vital juncture in British political history. The modern town of Staines lies just on the western edge of Greater London, precariously straddling both the Thames and the Surrey county boundary. This once industrious market town has settled into its status as an outer London suburb quite well. Its unfortunate name only superficially suggests that it is a stain upon the Thames. It's actually quite a nice little riverside town. Surprisingly though, what is now the site of outer London suburbia has a fascinating history that spans millennia.
Who has journeyed on the Exeter Road without noticing the town of Staines, with its host of antiquarian associations?
Asked the August 1828 edition of the succinctly named Mirror of Literature, Amusement and Instruction. According to the Mirror, not to be confused with the Daily Mirror, the London stone that gave the town its Saxon name of Stanes, or Staines in Anglo-Saxon, the ancient parish church and the old medieval bridge all made up the unique antique character of Staines. This antique character not only came from these material concerns, but from Staines' long history as an integral crossing point on the road west out of London. After the rather famous Roman invasion of 43 AD, it was at Staines, then known as Ad Pontes, Latin for at the bridges, that the rather ghastly named Devil's Highway crossed the mighty Thames. This highway went all the way to Silchester, at the time a very important Roman garrison city. From transporting Roman cavalry to medieval pilgrims bound for London and beyond, Staines' key location made it an integral part of any good travel itinerary of southeast England for over 2,000 years. The medieval wooden bridge was replaced in 1796, but it was so strategic a river crossing that Edward VI, Henry VIII's aggressively Protestant son, sought to destroy that crossing to deter the Catholic rebellions of 1549. Fortunately for the people of Staines, it was only the Industrial Revolution that brought about the end of this bridge, and hopefully a better future for that river crossing.
We hear of no new erection from 1262 to the year 1794, but from that year to the present there have not been less than 4 new bridges in succession, and on nearly the same site,
reported the Mirror of Literature, Amusement and Instruction in 1832. This quick succession of shoddily built bridges finally ended in that year, in 1832. The Mirror reproduced a striking woodcut of the new bridge and reported upon its opening.
This handsome structure has lately been completed, and was opened on Easter Monday last by their Majesties, and the court passing over with suitable ceremony.
With King William IV and his entire entourage triumphantly striding across the new crossing, it was clear that Staines' relationship with the monarchy had come on leaps and bounds since the days of Edward VI's anti-Catholic fervour that threatened the town's only lifeline.
This was a gala day for Staines and its vicinity,
reported the Mirror.
At 3 o'clock, a large concourse of well-dressed persons had assembled and were admitted by tickets on the bridge.
The king would then go on to address the crowd directly.
People of Staines,
Hearing a direct
I
address from the
give
king
to you
himself
your
was
bridge.
an extraordinary
It's now
event.
free.
This
Well
royal
done,
visit
everyone.
and the address that came from it hopefully would bring about a new age of prosperity for this burgeoning community. The future of Staines and the neighbouring town of Egham was finally secure, with the trade of London flowing freely across and through these humble but ancient communities. Was this actually the case though? Were the communities finally free? If we read into another report, we find that the grand cost of £68,000, roughly £6.3 million today, would need to be recouped somehow. And this would come through an annual total toll from the bridge of £4,000, equivalent to £375,000 today. It would be the people crossing the bridge, the people of Staines, the people of Egham, that would have to pay for this vital crossing point. Whilst the earlier wooden bridge had also extracted tolls, these were purely levied for the repair of the bridge and the causeway that protected nearby Egham from floods. At this time, though, almost all crossings on the Thames were paid, with shares in these crossings being bought by private companies. Rather than being there for the public good, they became vehicles for private profit. Now, in the modern day, we'd probably expect for such highways to be dealt with by our local council, be it that our county council or our borough council. But at this point in English history, the local council just did not exist. Such grand works fell under the jurisdiction of ad hoc committees that were granted their authority through a central act of parliament. In the case of Staines Parish Church, one such act was drawn up in 1827 to establish such a committee, tasking it with blowing up the remnants of the old church and to begin its reconstruction. This ad hoc form of local governance definitively ended in 1894, when the illustrious Staines Urban District Council was established. Before that point, there was a range of poor law organisations and health boards that were founded for the benefit of the area's sick and poor. Large construction projects, however, would still be managed through a hodgepodge of ad hoc committees and outside corporations for most of the 19th century. It was quite difficult for local residents to have any sort of say in how their own communities were run. In the case of the committee that was raised to rebuild Staines Parish Church, it was mostly made up of clergymen, local business owners, and brewers. People that these days might find their way onto a local council, but had no accountability to the people within their community, outside those who had quite a bit of money. It would take almost half a century for this ad hoc form of governance to finally get around to representing the peoples of Egham and Staines and free the bridge from this most hated of tolls. It may be remembered that in 1869 an act was passed which provided that the 5 bridges in the suburban districts, Kingston, Walton, Staines, Kew and Hampton, should be freed from toll out of the duties to be paid, reported the West Middlesex Herald in 1872. This act allowed the people of Staines to finally establish a committee with the ability to borrow enough money to cover the dues, freeing the bridge from tolls at last. Outside of Staines, however, the saga of the bridge was not received with much interest. Of our 3 millions of inhabitants, probably there are very few who feel much interest in the fact that Staines Bridge is now open toll-free. These dismissive words were printed in countless local London and provincial newspapers in the first week of March 1871. This metropolitan gossip column reflected the understandable disinterest that was held across the country towards such a localised event. The bridge's opening to the public did make the national broadsheets, however, but with the brevity characteristic of Fleet Street reporting on local matters.
The quiet suburban town of Staines was unfit upon the occasion of the freeing of its bridge from toll. by the Bridges Committee of the City of London.
Dispassionately reported the Times.
On Saturday, the bridge which connects the towns of Staines and Egham was formally freed for ever from tow,
reported the Daily Telegraph. Here at least, the report documented some of the celebrations that are so central to our understanding of the importance of this moment.
The towns of Staines and Egham were formally decorated with flags and arches, and the inhabitants turned out in great numbers to witness the ceremony.
Now, despite this limited reportage, if we really want to truly understand the scale of the jubilation and fervour that happened on that heady day, we must turn to the local press and the newspapers that were deeply bound to the communities that so deeply cherished the freedom of passage that this newly freed bridge represented.
Saturday was a red-letter day for Staines, and its celebration will go down to posterity as a happy event in the history of the town. For on that day, toll taking on Staines Bridge was abolished.
The lengthy report from the Surrey Advertiser recognised the historic event for what it was.
The people of Staines rejoiced greatly on Saturday. The main street presented quite a jubilant appearance.
The town centre was profusely decorated, from bunting to copious amounts of British and Imperial flags to an ornate display of goodwill between Staines and their former ratemasters, the City of London. This came in the form of the city's crest, laid lovingly in front of an extensive locally sourced floral display. The people of Staines clearly wanted to make quite a positive impression. Individual shop owners made their own displays of civic pride.
At Mr. Carpenter's shop, there was a clever representation of Old Father Thames.
This was a common personification of the river, a man which represented the River Thames. This evoked the Greco-Roman city guardians of old, and the Romano-British nature spirits that were once worshipped by the Roman and Britanno-Roman denizens of Ad Pontes. It represented a historic link to Staines' ancient heritage, and shows us that the people of Staines were aware of their place in history. Above this display, the towns of Egham and Staines were represented hand in hand, the county crests of Middlesex and Surrey uniting to embody the newfound unity of county and community. Looking back, it's rather ironic because these days both Staines and Egham are in the same county, in the county of Surrey, and Middlesex basically doesn't exist anymore. Not all displays, though, were so obvious. The reporters of the Surrey Advertiser were rather perplexed by a neat display above the drapery shop of a Mr. Ruffle.
The opening of Staines Bridge, the downfall of Old England.
Was this the man mourning the loss of an old English institution? Was this the only man in either Egham or Staines who actually wanted to keep this historic toll bridge open? Ruffle revealed his position to the rather perplexed reporters of the Surrey Advertiser.
The tollkeeper is a Mr. England by name. He's beloved by many, and with the departure of the gate, his occupation, like Othello's, is gone.
In keeping with the jubilant nature of the day, it was just a light-hearted joke playing upon the name of the old tollkeeper. As the morning turned into afternoon, the crowds gathered along Clarence Street, the road which still connects the bridge to the town centre to this day. The West Middlesex Herald narrated the scene.
Martial music was heard approaching, and a cry ran along the crowd.
They're coming! They're coming!
They're finally
here. They ain't taking their bloody time.
Numbers rushed down the high street, when lo! Instead of the cortege of dignitaries, police and soldiers they were expecting, the vans of the local ginger beer manufacturer, dressed in flags and headed by a brass band, passed through the town into Clarence Street.
Made in Staines, made for the people of Staines, by the people of Staines.
This rather unique scene served to whir away the monotony of expectancy that had developed before the grand cortege that was supposed to arrive finally would come in to Staines Station. Arriving at 1 o'clock, only slightly behind schedule, the large delegation of police, soldiers, politicians, chief citizens and county representatives were treated to a guard of honour from the 44th Middlesex Rifles. After the pleasantries were exchanged at the train station, this grand cortege began to march towards the toll house that was at the end of the bridge. They were followed by more martial music, but this time it wasn't trying to sell ginger beer, just trying to sell to these representatives the importance of the day and the importance of Staines. When the cortege finally got to the bridge, they addressed a large group of people that had assembled around the roads and around the bridge. At that point, Thomas Ashby, famed local brewer and chair of the local bridge committee, gave an apparently rousing address.
The inhabitants of Staines and the neighbourhood, believing that the removal of tolls from Staines Bridge will be attended with great advantage to the local community, and also of the opinion that all such hindrance to social...
Thomas Ashby went on at length, congratulating the town, the committee and the London Corporation that up to this point had forced Staines under the yoke of financial dependence. With the conclusion of his long address came another address from the Lord Mayor of London, congratulating Ashby, the Joint Committee and the people of Staines for their fortitude.
Mr. Ashby and gentlemen, I need scarcely say that the members of the Joint Committee...
He suggested that the members of Parliament would hopefully now throw open every other bridge along the river and make sure that this would never happen to another community ever again.
And I have no doubt that there are many members on both sides of the House of Commons who will be disposed to take the same view as myself.
With the conclusion of these long addresses, the crowd pushed towards the old tollgate, letting out cries of joy, all but drowning out the words of the London MP J.C. Lawrence, declaring that the bridge was now to be free. As the gate was unlocked for the final time, the cheers began again, competing with the official band of the 10th Hussar Regiment's rendition of God Save the Queen. To the adulation of the crowd, banners were unfurled along the bridge for all to see. Staines, according to the banners, was now free forever. The band struck up again, now emulating a joyous New Year's Day, with Auld Lang Syne, as the call went up from the officials to finally remove the hated toll gate. It was apparently at this point the intention of the committee to take the gate away somewhere for decent retirement. Perhaps to display it in the centre of the town, take it to a local museum, or have it in pride of place as a representative of Staines' newfound freedom. But those amongst the crowd, when they heard that the gate was to be taken away, began to cry out,
Drown him!
Drown him! Drown him!
The crowd began to push past the assembled security and police that were protecting the old antagonist of the Staines saga. But soon, that long-standing antagonist found his way to a watery grave, lifted from his hinges and launched into the depths of the river, once fiercely guarded. The rapturous adulation that came from the crowd was then punctured by a 21-gun salute, the cannons sighted just over the river on an Egham meadow that faced the river itself. The race to be the first across the newly freed bridge was now on, but it was quite closely fought.
Just prior to the bridge being declared free, a Mr. C. Morton drove up to the gate with 6 donkeys in hand.
But unfortunately for Mr. Morton and his indefatigable asses, the police turned them back.
Mate, you can't come this way.
Once the bridge was truly opened, each on the bridge got their chance to stride triumphantly across, replicating those first strides taken by William IV decades prior. When night fell, the massive crowd dispersed amongst the many alehouses, hotels, pubs and inns of Staines, their merriment punctuated by the wondrous firework display taking place above the newly freed town. Finally, after decades, if not centuries of fighting, Staines and Egan would be free. The jubilation seen on that day may at first seem rather odd, with an atmosphere befitting a national holiday seemingly out of place for a local bridge opening. Was this just an example of people with too much time on their hands going a little bit too crazy for something that didn't really matter that much? Well, as we noted before, it was in this period of history that formalised local government had begun to take shape. In 1872, the local Staines Health Board would be established, becoming the basis of the 1894 Staines Urban District. These local boundaries, cut from old county subdivisions and town areas, could now become the focal point for civic pride in a way only seen in larger cities up to this point. Those communities on the fringes of metropolitan areas were beginning to attain a sense of self, guided by the ad hoc committees and local dignitaries towards a complex local identity. Having the freedom of movement within one's community was a contested space at this vital point in British history. Other communities faced similar issues, the struggle emboldening local pride. Over 200 miles to the north of Staines stands Darwen Tower, a commemorative sandstone lookout point rising above the Lancashire moors of Blackburn and Darwen. Completed in 1898, the tower officially commemorated Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee.
It is a landmark to be seen far and wide, and whilst commemorating the record of Her Majesty, it would also fulfil a similar function concerning the celebration of the freedom of Darwen Moor,
noted the local Darwen News in 1897. That freedom was a long-fought, multi-decade battle that pitched local farmers, residents and co-workers against the local lord of the manor, a Reverend W.A. Duckworth. The absentee landlord resided in Somerset, further away from Darwen than Staines is, and he relied upon local agents to manage the land and persecute local residents that wished to use time-honoured traditional routes to go between their communities. A series of court cases led by the coal merchant W.T. Ashton, not to be confused with Ashby of Staines, finally brought the historic pathways under local authority control in 1898, the new system of local government facilitating these hard-fought freedoms. The late 19th century was a time of great political change in Britain. When Staines Bridge was built in 1832, barely anyone could vote, and local representation was limited to ad hoc committees of local dignitaries. By the end of the century, the national franchise had been expanded to all male householders, with formalised local government allowing local identities to flourish via bodies that could take local action for local residents. As these rights slowly but surely expanded, rights to access and roam were key contested sites where communities could assert their growing rights, identities and beliefs. But it was not yet a won battle. Today, over 30% of British land is owned by aristocrats. We definitively do not have the right to roam in Britain, with the public footpaths that we do have skirting through the edges of often hostile landowners' plots. Despite a range of acts of Parliament working towards universal access, in 2023, the right to camp on the privately owned yet commonly accessed land of Dartmoor and Devon was lost through a high-profile court decision. Looking back to the jubilation on the opening of Staines Bridge and the legacy of the fight to free Darwen Moor doesn't just tell us of obscure local histories told only through the newspapers that served those communities that they documented. We learn through these remarkable events of the interplay between local government, civic pride and basic rights. Without one, the rest cannot stand. That day in March 1871, almost forgotten even in the once proud town of Staines, stands as a poignant reminder of the power of community action and the importance of civic pride, not only in the late 19th century, but today in our own time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Paper Lives. It was written and performed by myself, with special thanks to our guest performers. We are also grateful to the British Newspaper Archive at the British Library and to Staines Library for the resources that we used throughout the research for this episode. If you want to find out more about this topic, please go to our own website www.paperlivespodcast.wordpress.com, where you will find an accompanying blog and links to further resources. If you're interested in local history in your own area, go to your local library, where they will usually have a local studies area and an accompanying archive. Once again, thank you for listening and tune in next time for another Paper Life.